Alright, part 4, the more interesting part of the project. So now we're going to build the day and night cycle, as in when I'll move my mouse to the left it's going to get dark, and when I'll move it back to the right it's going to be sunny again. I'll introduce a new library to do this. It's called Anime.js, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Alright, to get started we need a moonlight, and notice that I'm setting its intensity to 0. And I'm also positioning it 10 units to the left, whereas the sunlight is positioned 10 units to the right. So the moonlight is going to cast light from here, from top left. And I'm not sure if you remember, but in the original, like in the very first video of this series, I told you that I would explain to you what these properties really mean. And of course I never did because I'm an idiot, but I want to be forgiven. So I left these two lines here that, if you add to the scene, will show you what's the shadow camera for that light. And the shadow camera is basically the region of the light that is going to cast shadows. Normally you want it to be to enclose your scene as tightly as possible, such that your shadows are better distributed towards your scene. And this is a nice way of seeing what the shadow camera looks like, and then you can play with these values, and with this helper you're going to see the effect of it. With that said, now we need a new library. Just have to copy and paste this link over here and you can start using Anime.js. It is a fantastic library to do animations with, and yeah, it's pretty easy to use as well. I'm going to explain to you in a moment how that works and how we're going to use it in this project. The first two things that we're going to animate are the sun and the moon background. Now remember, these are just two divs that we have created in the index.html file, and they are just coded as linear gradients. And right above the set animation loop function, I've included this little block of code. So what I'm doing here, I'm listening for a key press event on the keyboard, and I'm specifically interested in the J key. So if I press any other key that is not the J key, this function is going to return and do nothing. Otherwise, I'm going to call Anime, the new library that we just imported. Now, targets selects what elements is Anime.js going to use for its animations. So in this case, I'm targeting the sun background HTML element, which is a div element, and I'm saying with this statement here, we want to animate the opacity of this element, and we want it to go from 0 to 1. The duration of the animation is 500 milliseconds, and the easing is this one, ease in out assign. I'm going to explain how this works in a moment. So let's see how this all works. Now every time that I press K, you're going to notice this strange flashing animations. So what's happening is that the background goes, it is immediately set to 0, so everything becomes white because the default background of the document is white, but it slowly goes back to 1, so it goes from 0 to 1 as we specified in the animation every time that I press K, and the duration of the animation is 500 milliseconds as we expected. And I have found this beautiful website that explains very clearly how the easing part of the animation affects the animation itself. So let's say for example that we want to animate this little box and we want it to move from left to right and then from right to left, and we're specifying a duration of let's say 1.5 seconds, and the easing is linear. Now if I press left, you're seeing that the motion is very uniform, kind of robotic, because it starts at the same speed and it keeps on going at the same speed and then it stops abruptly. There's no build up, like it's always the same speed from start to finish. Instead, if we specify another easing, for example ease in out, the effect is going to be a lot more smoother. You see, it starts slowly and then it goes it increases the speed as it goes on in the center, and then it starts to slow back again until it gets to the end. There's plenty of easings that we could use with Anime.js. I encourage you to play with them. I found that this one plays nicely with the project that we're building, but feel free to experiment. Like, you don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing. Now, normally you would use Anime.js to animate HTML elements, but you can do a lot more with it. In fact, we can refactor a little bit this code to do something way more interesting. So let me show you that. we don't necessarily have to use HTML elements. Anime.js has a very interesting feature where you could use objects themselves and animate properties of objects. So in this case, for example, we have an object with a property called t that is just 0. We could set the target of our animation to the object itself and then say, hey, we want to update the t property of this object, and we want the t property of this object to go from 0 to 1. The animation needs to last 500 milliseconds like the previous animations, and we also have access to 2 interesting callbacks. Complete is going to run when the animation is completed, and update is going to run on every frame where the animation is being updated. And inside this function, object.t will be a value between 0 to 1, and the animation itself is going to complete in 500 milliseconds. So for example, inside the update function, when we are in the middle of the animation, object.t is going to be 0.5, which is pretty neat. This opens up a lot of interesting options. So for example, let's assume that we want to animate both the sun and the moon background's opacity. What can we do with this object? So let's say that when this animation starts, t is going to be 0. And what does 1 minus t means? It means 1. So the sun background with this statement, when the animation starts, it's going to be 1. But object.t is going to be 0, so the moon background is going to be 0 when the animation starts. At the end of the animation, on the other hand, object.t is going to be 1. So the sun background's opacity is going to be 0. And in the opposite case, the moon background will be object.t, which is going to be 1. So that's going to be fully opaque. And every value in between is going to animate these 2 backgrounds such that the animation is smooth. So yeah, let's see what that means in practice. In practice, it means that every time that I press J, I'm going to see this. So basically, it goes from the sun background being fully opaque to be fully transparent, and then it goes from the moon background from being fully transparent to being fully opaque. Now we're going to do something more interesting, but the principle is exactly the same. So we're always going to use the same logic that we used here. The sunlight, initially when the animation starts, is going to be 3.5 times 1 minus 0, because object.t, when the animation starts, is going to be 0. So the sunlight intensity is going to be at its maximum, 3.5. On the other hand, moonlight.intensity is going to be 0 because it's 3.5 times 0. But as the animation goes, object.t is going to slightly increase little by little from 0 to 1 to the point where it becomes 1. And when it becomes 1, this block is going to be 0. And so the sunlight intensity is going to be 0. And the sunlight intensity is not going to be visible. On the other hand, the moonlight intensity will be 3.5 times 1. So the maximum intensity. In the same way, I am changing the Y position of the sunlight and of the moonlight. So basically, as the animation goes, the sunlight's position is going to go from 20 to 0. And the moonlight position is going to go from 0, because object.t will be 0, to 20, because at the end, object.t will be 1, and this block will return 20. And I also realized that I don't really like the sheen effect of the sphere material when it's basically dark mode. So when we are going in dark mode, I'm basically setting sheen to 0. So when object.t is 1, I'm setting sheen to 0. And if I press J now, this happens. Look how cool that is. You can also see the reflection of the light going down and then the moonlight going up. But this is not all. So we have to change the opacity of the rings and the environment map intensity of all the elements of the plane, because when it's moonlight, the environment map intensity that we have in the normal day scene, I think it's too high. And so I want to tweak that a little bit such that when it's nighttime, the environment map intensity is way lower. And that's going to be extremely easy. So I'm in the sphere mesh and I'm adding these 2 new properties, sun environment map intensity and moon environment map intensity. I'm doing the same exact thing for the planes and for the trails. And the last thing that we need is to do sort of the same thing with the rings, but we're going to change the opacity of the rings. So I'm going to create two new properties called sun opacity and moon opacity. These are the values for the first ring. These are the values that I chose for the second ring, and the values that I chose for the last one. And I hope you're not going to hate me for this part because it's a little bit convoluted, but it's not as difficult as it looks like. So here's what I'm doing. I'm iterating all the children of the scene with this line. And for each child of the scene, I'm traversing it. So I'm traversing all the possible meshes that are nested inside this object. And I'm basically checking if they are meshes and if they have the environment map property. If they do, I'm basically changing the environment map intensity. And now we're going to animate the environment map intensity. So we're going to do that with a process that is known as linear interpolation. Now, let's assume, for example, that we have two values, the value 1 and the value 2. So what we want to do is to smoothly move from 1 to 2 over time. So we want to go 1.1, 1.2, 1.5, 1.7 until we get to 2 over time. And in this case, our animation duration is 500 milliseconds. So what we could do is do 1 minus t, 2 times t. So what did I do here? At the start of the animation, remember t is going to be 0. So what's going to happen here is that we will basically see this little statement being computed. It's going to be 1 times 1 plus 0. So the result will be 1. What if we are at the end of the animation? At the end of the animation, t will be 1, and the end result of this whole statement is going to be 1 times 0 plus 2. And so at the end of the animation, we'll have 2, and at the start of the animation, we'll have 1. What about in the middle of the animation? Okay, I've formatted it a little bit better. So in the middle of the animation, t is going to be 0.5. And so this value will become 0.5. So 1 times 0.5, it's going to be 0.5. And 2 times 0.5, it's going to be 1. So in the middle of the animation, as we expected, the value that we get is 1.5. So this is a nice little way of animating from one value, in this case we choose 1 as an example, to another one, in this case we choose 2, with this process called linear interpolation. And we're doing it here with the sun environment map intensity, which is the value that we want at the beginning, and the moon environment map intensity, which is the value that we want at the end. Now look how cool the transition looks like now. All the properties are being properly animated, and we're moving from daytime to nighttime. Now we need a way to go back from nighttime to daytime, so I'm going to refactor this function a little bit to be able to do that. Alright, this looks a little bit complicated, but I promise you it's not. We first need a variable that tells us if it's daytime, and then a variable that tells us if the animation is still ongoing. So if the animation is still ongoing, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to return from the function. We are going to let the animation finish before we start a new one. And now it's an interesting time to use the complete function, the complete callback that Anime.js gives us. So when the animation is completed, we're going to say, hey, we're not animating anymore. And before the animation starts, we're saying, hey, we're animating. Animating is true. Also, when the animation is completed, whatever daytime was before, now it's going to be the opposite of it. So if daytime was true, now it becomes false. If it was false, now it becomes true. Another thing that has changed is that the t property originally was an array with 0 and 1, because we wanted the object.t property to go from 0 to 1. But what if we want to do the opposite? What if we want to move from nighttime to daytime? It's super easy. We just have to give it the opposite array. In that case, we would like to move from 1 to 0. And so that's basically what's happening here. If it's not daytime, so if it's nighttime, then we are going to use this array. If it's daytime, then we need to go from 0 to 1. So we're going to use this one instead. I know that this doesn't make any sense, but let's keep it the way it is for now, and let's see what's going on now every time that we press J. And it works. Every time you press J, it goes from nighttime to daytime, back and forth. So mission complete. Now the last thing that we need to do is to hook up the mouse position into this whole process. First things first, this needs to become a mouse move event listener. We're not listening for keyboard events anymore. And we can remove this statement here. And we also have to change the logic over there. So eClient.x is going to be the X position of the mouse whenever the browser detects a mouse move event. And what I'm basically saying here is that when we are 200 pixels away from the right edge of the screen and it's not daytime, then we want the animation to go from nighttime to daytime. On the other end, if we are 200 pixels away from the left side of the screen and it's already daytime, then we want to animate and basically go back to nighttime. Otherwise, any value in between these two edges, we're just going to do nothing and return. I could have explained that way better. I am really sorry, but the video got way too long and I don't want to lose too much of your time. But hey, the benefit is that everything works now. If I move from one edge to the other one, look at this super cool animation that we can see here. And I think that this is really going to impress your users. So yeah, it's party time, I guess. So I hope that you enjoyed the process and I hope that it was not too frustrating. And I don't think that I have to tell you, right? Do I have to tell you that? Yeah, I will probably tell you that. Making these videos take quite a bit of time and effort, and I do it for free, so I would really appreciate if, well, you press the like button and leave a nice comment. I would really like that. And we're going to do a lot of more interesting stuff in this channel. The next video that I have planned is on React Tree Fiber, so please stay tuned. We're going to do a lot of nice stuff together, and yeah, see you on the next video. Bye bye.